Renaissance philosophy. How did philosophy and the Renaissance shape each other? The Renaissance was a rebirth of old ideas, particularly of those from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. It was on this basis that Renaissance philosophers found their foothold, shaping modern philosophy. Renaissance philosophy branched into three parts: humanism, political philosophy, and natural philosophy. Before we explore Renaissance philosophy, we must take a look at philosophy in the Middle Ages to get a sense of how different they were. In the Middle Ages, there was a large emphasis on the church, with a common belief that preparing for the afterlife was very important. However, as the Renaissance began, European scholars became more and more interested in the writings of the Greeks and Romans before the Middle Ages. Many of the scholars embraced those ideas, believing that they were much better than the Middle Age philosophy. The writings that those scholars uncovered and their own ideas created the idea that people's lifetime on Earth was important. This was how the Renaissance was different from the Middle Ages. Now, let's take a look at the first branch of philosophy, humanism. Francesco Petrarch, who was an Italian humanist, scholar, and poet, was best known for his discovery of ancient texts. He promoted their studies to artists, writers, and scholars, believing that they should return to the original manuscripts to achieve their humanist studies. In the Renaissance, being a humanist meant that you learned the ancient languages rather than reading the interpretations of translators. This way, scholars could read and achieve their own understanding of the texts. Even though the old texts were not abolished, humanists contributed new ideas and new methods. Humanists developed new rhetoric and learning, which we can still see today. Let us meet René Descartes. René Descartes, best known for saying, "I think, therefore I am," lived in France from 1596 to 1650. He was first a mathematician, then a natural philosopher, and then finally a metaphysician. But more importantly, Descartes was a skeptic. He was someone who questioned everything. And why was he a skeptic? Because he realized a lot of the things he believed before were false. For instance, when we believed that Santa Claus was real. However, it's very important to remember that at that time, we truly believed that Santa Claus was real. We never doubted the fact that he was indeed real. This is what got Descartes thinking. What if there were things that he believed right now that were wrong, except there just simply wasn't anyone there to tell him that he was wrong? So, in his quest to hold only beliefs that were true, he decided to disbelieve all of his beliefs. In his book, Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes gives us an analogy. Imagine if there were a basket of apples. Due to the fear that a few are rotten and you don't want other apples to also be spoiled, you would dump out the entire basket to examine each and every one. After, you would only put the ones that were still fresh back into the basket. Just like fruits, one bad idea could cause another to also be bad, so Descartes started dumping out his own basket. Descartes started with empirical beliefs, which are beliefs we form through the use of our senses. Descartes was so skeptical of everything that he even engaged with the idea that everything we are living in is false. At a point of despair, Descartes realized one thing: that he could not doubt that he was doubting. Through this one discovery, he was able to build back his thoughts and state one of his most famous phrases, cogito ergo sum, "I think, therefore I am." Even though Descartes' reasoning was not flawless, and John Locke would later come to dispute his ideas, Descartes was definitely one of the most influential philosophers of the Renaissance. Let us now examine the second branch of philosophy, political philosophy. Political philosophy is concerned with ideas involved in political opinion. It deals with the types of laws that should be enforced, what types of governments should be in power, the education of a leader, etc. In the Renaissance, there were arguably four main political writers who characterized the disputes in political philosophy, but also the similarities. Let us first examine Erasmus, who was known as the Prince of the Humanists. Born in around 1464 to a priest, he was a Christian humanist who largely is the reason why there were political philosophers. A prince, he declared in his writing, should study the classics and ancient leaders. Largely due to his Christian background, he believed that leaders should study the Bible. It was because of this belief which led him to find a middle ground between ancient ideas and new Christian ideas. During the Renaissance, he was able to communicate via letters with hundreds of people, including Thomas More and Martin Luther. It was through this way that his ideas were able to spread and influence others. Let us now examine Christine de Pizan, who was one of the most influential women writers of that time. Even though it was rare that women in the Renaissance were educated, girls in wealthy families were often educated alongside their brothers. Christine de Pizan was one of the lucky few. Her book of the City of Ladies talks about a utopian society. She brings together the powerful women in history in this one city. The Virgin Mary is queen of this utopia. On top of the greatness and glory she paints the city as, it is more about the power of women. She says women can be virtuous leaders and rational beings, and that leadership by virtuous women could beget virtuous communities. Let us now examine someone who is very different from Christine de Pizan. Welcome, Machiavelli. Machiavelli's most notable work is debatably The Prince. Throughout The Prince, he embraces the idea of leaders studying the classics, similar to Erasmus, but the attitudes he believed leaders required were much more different. When asked on whether a ruler should be loved or feared, he believed that when a leader could not achieve both, they should rather be feared. It was through this way that a prince could retain power and maintain order. This approach was known as the realist approach, where he focused his writings on what was effective in achieving the aims of leaders. Another part of The Prince is a principle that is commonly seen today. Although many people are not sure if Machiavelli actually said this, he first brought up the idea of the ends justify the means. This is one of the key ideas in ethics, with the other being the means justify the ends. What Machiavelli means when he writes this phrase is that as long as you achieve that outcome, the ways in which you get to it does not matter. Another notable part of Machiavelli's work is his book, Art of War. He thought leaders should not always go to lengths to keep peace. In some cases, war was necessary. Only through effective war was political leadership secured, because, as he has stated, never was anything great achieved without danger. Let us now explore Thomas More, who believed that peace was needed. He was another notable political philosopher who was one of Erasmus's friends. In his book Utopia, he talks about an ideal city-state where there is no private property. People are driven by peace and cooperation instead of violence. More importantly, he believed that humanistic ideals could lead to prosperity. This would be arguably true for the society we live in today. Let us now take a look at the third branch of philosophy, natural philosophy, which is about the study of nature. More specifically, it was about the philosophical study of nature and the universe before modern science. During the Renaissance, natural philosophy could be found outside of universities, unlike the Middle Ages. This was particularly true within educated groups of people, such as Academia Fiorentina, which was funded by Duke Cosimo de' Medici. Not only did natural philosophy have a large impact on the Renaissance, in turn, the Renaissance also impacted and helped advance natural philosophy. With inventions such as the printing press, the telescope, the microscope, and even the discovery of different landforms, this all benefited the advancement of natural philosophy. Within the natural philosophy sphere, there were conflicting and bounding ideas. Natural philosophy was a prerequisite for learning medicine, making them closely tied together. There were disputes between supporters of Aristotle and Galen. Aristotle was seen as important because of his philosophical system, but Galen had in-depth research of the human body. However, due to the nature of these disputes, which were based on unconfirmed ideas, many preferred to ignore the differences. Let us now explore the world of Francis Bacon. His father worked in politics, while his mother's father was a humanist. This had a great impact on his future. In Parliament, he closely followed Machiavelli's political ideology. However, as a philosopher, he had many controversial takes on natural philosophy. Not only did he disagree with Aristotle, but also with Plato and Renaissance philosophers. He decided to discover pre-Socratic philosophy for himself and found Democritus as his role model. Bacon makes two contributions to natural philosophy. The first contribution he makes is the identification of assumptions. He gives us three methods to identify these fallacies. The first is sophistical fallacies. These fallacies are an appeal to flattery, where people exaggerate what actually happened. Second is fallacies of interpretation. When something is up for different people to get different interpretations, Bacon cautions against sophism. Finally is false appearances or idols. These appear to us in many places, which Bacon lists out for us. They appear as idols of the tribe, idols of the cave, idols of the marketplace, and finally, idols of the theater. Through these three ways, people are more aware of the mistakes they make. His second and arguably more important contribution is his scientific method, which is also known as induction. Inductive reasoning is when we make repeated observations and then generalize the observations into conclusions. His scientific method, however, shows something even more about the Renaissance, and it is this willingness to challenge ancient authorities when he doesn't take up Aristotle's deductive reasoning, but instead creates his own inductive reasoning. Through these two contributions, Sir Francis Bacon is not only able to shape the Renaissance, but also the world we live in today. At the end of the day, philosophy and the Renaissance have both shaped each other, benefiting not only philosophers and Renaissance men, but also countless generations to come. Thank you for listening.